I heard her voice before I saw her. That dismissive little laugh she does when she thinks she's being clever, the one that makes my stomach tighten every single time. Your mother has enough, she won't even notice. I was standing in my kitchen, kettle in hand, having just come back from the gym 20 minutes earlier than usual. My Pilates instructor had canceled the last portion of class due to a family emergency, and I'd decided to come home and enjoy a quiet cup of Earl Grey before my afternoon reading. The house was supposed to be empty. Garrett and Melody weren't expected until dinner. But there she was, my daughter-in-law, standing in my foyer with her phone pressed to her ear, reaching for my purse on the entryway table. Not just any purse. The Italian leather bag my mother gave me 3 years ago, the day she moved into assisted living. The last gift she handed me with her own 2 hands before she surrendered her independence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Through the reflection in the window above my sink, I watched Melody's perfectly manicured fingers close around the strap of my bag. She was still laughing into her phone, completely unaware that I was 15 feet away. Seriously, Kristen, she probably has like 10 of these. The woman doesn't even work anymore, just sits around counting her money and judging everyone. Another laugh. I just need to grab something real quick for our shopping trip. I'll put it back before she even knows it's gone. It's not like she's going to miss a few $100s. My hand gripped the kettle so hard my knuckles went white. A few $100s. As if that's what this was about. As if 30 years of building a career, of being the only woman in boardrooms full of men who underestimated me, of investing wisely and living below my means so I could retire comfortably at 55, as if all of that was just sitting around counting money. I watched her open my purse right there in the foyer. She didn't even have the decency to wait until she was in her car. Her fingers found my wallet, the brown leather bifold Thomas gave me on our 25th anniversary, and she slipped it into her own designer bag, a Gucci crossbody that my son bought her for Christmas last year, with money he doesn't have because he's still paying off law school debt while supporting her lifestyle. "Okay, I'm leaving now," Melody said into her phone. "Meet you at Burlington in 30? I saw this amazing Burberry bag online and it's calling my name. Today's the day, girl." I can feel it. She walked out my front door without looking back. Didn't close it gently. Didn't check if anyone was home. Didn't show even a moment's hesitation about what she'd just done. The confidence of it stunned me. This wasn't her first time. I knew that now with absolute certainty. This was routine for her. I set the kettle down slowly. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness, from something else entirely. Something that had been building for 2 years, maybe longer. Something I'd been pushing down and swallowing and rationalizing away because I loved my son and I wanted peace in my family. But there comes a moment when peace becomes cowardice, when keeping quiet stops being kindness and starts being complicity in your own disrespect. I picked up my phone from the counter. I knew exactly who to call. Not Garrett, not yet. He would make excuses for her, try to smooth things over, tell me it was a misunderstanding. He always did. That's what I'd trained him to do, by never holding anyone accountable, by always being the one who forgave and forgot and moved on. No. I called my bank. "Good afternoon. This is First National. My name is David. How can I help you today?" "Hello, David. My name is Corinne Brennan. I need to report a theft." There was a pause on the line. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Brennan. Can you tell me what happened?" "Someone has stolen my wallet from my home. I need you to flag all my cards immediately. If anyone attempts to use them, I want the transaction declined, and I want them to know the cards have been reported stolen." "Of course, Mrs. Brennan. I can do that right away. Would you like me to also contact the police on your behalf?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Melody's face in a police station. The humiliation. The permanent record. My son's career as an attorney, potentially tarnished by association with a wife who had a theft charge. "Not yet," I said. "But please make detailed notes on my account. I may need documentation later." "Absolutely. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "Yes. When the person tries to use my cards, can you tell me where it happened?" "We can certainly provide that information in your transaction alerts. You should receive a notification if any declined transactions are attempted." "Perfect. Thank you, David." I ended the call and sat down at my kitchen table. The tea was forgotten now. I stared at my phone, waiting, knowing exactly what was coming. Melody had a 30-minute drive to Burlington Mall. She'd probably browse for a while, work up her appetite for spending money that wasn't hers. I figured I had maybe an hour or two before the real show began. In that hour, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I went upstairs to the guest room where Melody and Garrett sometimes stayed when they visited, and I looked through the closet. I'm not proud of it. Snooping feels wrong, even when you know you're right. But I needed to see. I needed to know exactly how deep this went. What I found made my chest hurt in a way I can't properly describe. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones I thought I'd misplaced during the move 3 years ago when I downsized after Thomas died. My mother's vintage Hermes scarf, the one she'd given me for my 40th birthday that I'd searched for desperately last spring. A small Tiffany box containing a tennis bracelet Thomas had bought me for our 30th anniversary, a piece I'd assumed was lost when we had the house cleaned out. All of it, tucked away in a Louis Vuitton weekender bag in the back of the closet. Stolen. From my own home, by my own daughter-in-law, hidden in plain sight because she knew I'd never suspect her. Because she knew I'd blame myself for losing things, for being careless, for getting older and more forgetful. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and let myself feel the full weight of it. 2 years. 2 years of small violations, of boundary crossings, of being robbed not just of possessions, but of my own trust in my mind. Every time I couldn't find something, I'd wondered if I was slipping, if this was what getting older looked like. If I was becoming my mother, who sometimes forgets what day it is now, who needs help remembering her medications. Melody had let me believe I was losing my mind. She'd watched me search for things she knew exactly where to find. And she'd smiled that sweet smile and offered to help look, all while knowing the truth. My phone buzzed. Transaction alert. Declined. $3,247 at Burberry Burlington Mall. Card reported, lost, stolen. I stared at that notification for a long moment. $3,247 for a handbag, with my money, without asking, without permission, without even the pretense of borrowing. Another buzz, another notification. Declined. $89 at Starbucks Reserve, Burlington Mall. Card reported lost, stolen. She couldn't even buy herself a coffee without stealing from me. My phone rang, Garrett's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mom. His voice was tight, controlled, the way he sounds in court when he's trying not to show emotion. What did you do? Hello to you too, sweetheart. Mom, I'm serious. Melody just called me hysterical. She said she tried to buy something at the mall and the card was declined. The manager told her the wallet was reported stolen. She said security came over. She said people were filming her. She fainted, Mom. She actually fainted in the middle of Burberry. I felt something then. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the strange hollow feeling you get when you finally let go of something you've been holding too tight for too long. Is she hurt? She's fine. She's embarrassed and upset, but she's fine. What I want to know is why you reported your wallet stolen when you knew Melody had it. There it was, the assumption. Not, why did Melody have your wallet, but why did you report it when Melody had it? As if her having it was normal. As if I was the one who'd done something wrong. Garrett, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Mom, this isn't the time for... Did you know your wife was taking money from me? Silence. Long, heavy silence. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I can hear it in your voice. You've known, haven't you? Maybe not the details, but you've known something wasn't right. You've seen things that didn't add up. And you chose not to ask questions because you didn't want to know the answers. Melody borrows things sometimes. It's not a big deal. We're family. Borrowing requires permission, Garrett. What your wife did today was theft, and it wasn't the first time. More silence. I could hear Melody's voice in the background, high-pitched and frantic, though I couldn't make out the words. I found things, Garrett, in the guest room closet. Things I thought I'd lost years ago. Grandmother's earrings. Mom's scarf. The bracelet your father gave me. Mom, I'm sure there's an explanation. There is. Your wife is a thief, and not a very clever one, apparently, since she kept her stolen goods in my own house. I heard him exhale, a long, shaky breath that told me everything. He'd suspected. Maybe he'd even known. But admitting it would mean dealing with it, and my son had learned from his father that dealing with problems was optional if you could avoid them long enough. What do you want me to do? His voice was small now, not the confident attorney. Just my boy, the one who used to come to me when he skinned his knee, when his first girlfriend broke his heart, when he failed his contracts exam and thought his life was over. I want you to come to dinner this weekend, both of you. We're going to have a conversation that's about 2 years overdue. And Garrett, if your wife can't admit what she's done and take responsibility for it, then we have a much bigger problem than missing jewelry. She's not going to want to come. I'm not asking what she wants. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Sunday, 6 o'clock. We're going to sit down like adults and figure out how we move forward from this. Because right now, the way things are, we can't continue. And if she refuses? I thought about my mother in her assisted living apartment, still sharp as a tack, still the strongest woman I've ever known. I thought about her letter, the one she'd written 3 years ago that I'd never opened because I was waiting for the right moment. I thought about my daughter Sloane in Seattle, 6 months pregnant with my first grandchild, who had warned me about Melody from the beginning. If she refuses, then she's making a choice. And choices have consequences. That's something I should have taught you a long time ago, but I was too busy keeping the peace to be the mother you needed. I hung up before he could respond. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The rest of that afternoon, I sat in my living room and waited. Not for Garrett or Melody or anyone else. I waited for myself to feel regret, to feel guilty, to feel the familiar urge to call back and apologize and smooth everything over. It never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. The kind of bone-deep certainty that comes when you finally stop pretending things are fine when they're not. When you stop sacrificing your own dignity on the altar of family peace. I thought about Thomas, my husband of 33 years, gone now for 3 winters. He was a good man in so many ways. A good provider, a faithful partner, a loving father. But he was also a man of his generation, one who believed that women should be the peacekeepers, the smoothers over, the ones who sacrificed their own needs for the comfort of everyone else. I'd played that role for so long I'd forgotten it was a costume. I'd forgotten there was someone underneath it, someone with boundaries and limits and the right to be treated with basic respect. Melody had pushed me past those limits today. Not because she'd taken my wallet, though that was violation enough, but because of what she'd said while she did it. Your mother has enough. She won't even notice. As if my things weren't really mine. As if my money, earned through decades of hard work, wasn't really mine. As if I existed only as a resource to be tapped, an ATM with a heartbeat, a means to fund someone else's lifestyle. I was done being that person. The sun was setting when I finally got up from my chair. I walked to the foyer, to the spot where Melody had stood that morning, and I looked at the table where my purse usually sat. It wasn't there now, of course. She'd taken it with her, but I could see the ghost of it, the impression it had left after years of sitting in the same spot. I'd get a new bag, something different, something that didn't carry the weight of my mother's sacrifice or the memory of Melody's greedy fingers. This bag, when I got it back, would go somewhere safe. Somewhere it could be what it was meant to be, a reminder of where I came from and the woman who raised me. As for Melody, her reckoning was coming. Sunday dinner would be the beginning of it. But I suspected it would take much longer than one meal to sort through the damage she'd caused, not just to my possessions or my bank account, but to my relationship with my son, to my faith in my own judgment, to the family I'd worked so hard to build. Some things, once broken, can never be fully repaired, but that didn't mean they weren't worth trying to fix. I went to bed early that night, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. My last thought before sleep took me was of my mother's voice. The way she sounded when I was small and scared and needed someone to tell me everything would be okay. "Corinne, darling," she used to say, "you come from strong women. We bend, but we don't break. And when someone tries to break us, we show them exactly what we're made of." Tomorrow I would start showing Melody exactly what I was made of. Tonight, I would rest. The storm was coming, and I needed to be ready. To understand how I ended up standing in my kitchen watching my daughter-in-law steal from me, you need to understand the woman I used to be, the woman I was before Thomas died, before Melody entered our lives, before I learned that keeping the peace sometimes means losing yourself. I grew up in Southie, back when it was still rough around the edges, and a long way from the gentrified neighborhood it would become. My mother, Lorraine, cleaned houses for wealthy families in Beacon Hill, leaving before dawn and coming home after dark with hands cracked from chemicals and a back that ached so badly she'd sometimes cry while making our dinner. My father left when I was 7, just walked out one morning and never came back. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. Mom never spoke ill of him, not once, but I saw the way her jaw tightened whenever someone mentioned fathers or husbands or men who kept their promises. She raised me alone on a housekeeper's salary, and somehow she made it work. I wore secondhand clothes and ate a lot of rice and beans, but I never missed a meal, and I never doubted that I was loved. More importantly, I never doubted that I was capable of something bigger. "You're going to college, Corinne," Mom would tell me every night before bed. "You're going to wear nice clothes and work in an office with air conditioning, and nobody's ever going to look at you like you're less than them. That's why we sacrifice now. That's why we do without. So you can have everything I couldn't." I believed her. I worked 3 jobs through high school, saved every penny, earned a scholarship to Boston College that covered most of my tuition. I majored in finance because I wanted to understand money, wanted to master the thing that had always been scarce in our house. I graduated summa cum laude and got a job at a small investment firm downtown, the only woman in a department of 12. Those early years were brutal. I was underestimated constantly, passed over for promotions that went to less qualified men, subjected to comments about my appearance and questions about when I planned to quit and have babies. I learned to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. I learned to document everything, to build alliances carefully, to pick my battles with surgical precision. By 35, I was a department head. By 40, a director. By 48, I was the CFO of a regional bank, one of only a handful of women in the country holding that title at the time. I retired at 55 with a net worth of just over $4 million, all of it earned through decades of discipline and strategic thinking. Thomas and I met at a charity gala when I was 26. He was a civil engineer, steady and kind, and utterly unintimidated by my ambition. We married 2 years later and had Garrett when I was 30, Sloan when I was 32. I kept working through both pregnancies, returned to the office 6 weeks after each delivery because that's what women in my position had to do if we wanted to be taken seriously. I won't pretend our marriage was perfect. Thomas came from a traditional Irish Catholic family where women ran the household and men made the decisions. We clashed over that constantly in the early years. He wanted me to stay home once we could afford it. I wanted to keep building my career. We compromised in ways that satisfied neither of us completely, but we made it work because we loved each other and because we were both too stubborn to quit. The children grew up knowing their mother was different from their friends' mothers. I missed school plays and soccer games. I traveled for work when they needed me home. Garrett once told me, when he was about 16 and furious at me for missing his birthday dinner, that he wished he had a normal mom who baked cookies and volunteered at the PTA. That hurt more than I'd ever admit to him. It still hurts now. Thomas died 3 years ago, suddenly, without warning. A heart attack at 61, on a Tuesday afternoon while he was mowing the lawn. I found him when I came home from running errands. He was already gone by the time the ambulance arrived. The grief nearly destroyed me. For months, I couldn't function. I'd built my whole adult life around this partnership, this person who knew all my secrets and loved me anyway. And suddenly, he was just gone. No goodbye, no last words, no chance to say all the things I'd been saving for someday. When I finally emerged from that fog, I made myself a promise. No more waiting for someday. No more swallowing my words to keep the peace. No more being the woman who sacrifices her own needs so everyone else can be comfortable. I'd spent my whole career fighting for respect in boardrooms. It was time to demand that same respect in my own home. And then Garrett brought home Melody. I remember the first time I met her. 6 months after Thomas's funeral, Garrett called to say he had someone special he wanted me to meet. I was still fragile, still grieving, but I wanted to be happy for my son. He'd been so devastated by his father's death. If he'd found someone who made him smile again, I wanted to welcome her with open arms. Melody was 26 then, beautiful in that carefully curated way that takes hours of effort to look effortless. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes that I later learned she couldn't actually afford. She was charming at dinner, asking all the right questions about my career, complimenting my home, telling Garrett how lucky he was to have such an accomplished mother. It was Sloane who noticed first. My daughter had flown in from Seattle for the weekend. And afterward, when Melody and Garrett had gone, she sat me down in the kitchen with a glass of wine and a worried expression. "Mom, I don't trust her." "You just met her, sweetheart. Give her a chance. I've seen women like her before." She asked me 3 times, "What you do for a living?" She kept looking around the house like she was appraising it. "And did you see the way she looked at your jewelry?" I dismissed it. I told myself Sloane was being protective, maybe even jealous of her brother's new relationship. I told myself that I'd raised my daughter to be too suspicious, too guarded, and that not everyone had ulterior motives. I was wrong. Sloane was right about everything. The wedding happened fast, less than a year after they met. I paid for most of it, because Melody's mother was a receptionist in Delaware who could barely cover her own rent, and because Garrett was drowning in law school debt that would take him another decade to pay off. I didn't mind. I wanted my son to be happy, and if a nice wedding was what it took, I could afford it. But I noticed things. Small things at first. The way Melody's eyes would sweep over any room we entered, cataloging valuables. The questions she asked about my retirement accounts, framed as innocent curiosity about financial planning. The way she'd comment on my possessions with a strange proprietary tone, as if she was already calculating what would eventually be hers. Then the borrowing started. A cashmere sweater she needed for a job interview and never returned. A pair of diamond earrings for her sister's wedding that came back with 1 stone missing. My vintage Chanel clutch for a charity event, returned with a stain she claimed was already there. Each incident was small enough to dismiss. Each excuse was just plausible enough to accept. And every time I considered confronting her, I thought about Garrett, my son, who'd already lost his father, who was working 60-hour weeks trying to build his career while supporting a wife who couldn't seem to hold down a job for more than a few months at a time. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself that family helps family, that possessions don't matter as much as relationships, that I had plenty and she had little, and I should be grateful to share. What I was really doing was teaching Melody that there were no consequences for taking what wasn't hers. I was training her to see me as a resource rather than a person. I was being complicit in my own exploitation because I was afraid of conflict, afraid of losing my son, afraid of being the difficult mother-in-law that nobody wants to visit. The apartment was the biggest compromise. A year and a half ago, Garrett and Melody were evicted from their rental because Melody had been spending the rent money on clothes and spa treatments. Garrett was humiliated, panicked, unsure what to do. I offered to pay for a new apartment just until they got back on their feet. A temporary solution, I told myself. 6 months, maybe a year. 18 months later, I'm still writing that rent check every month. $3,200 for a 2-bedroom in Back Bay that Melody insisted they needed because she couldn't possibly live anywhere less prestigious. When I suggested they find something more affordable, she cried and told Garrett I was trying to control their lives. He believed her. Or maybe he just wanted to believe her, because the alternative was admitting he'd married someone who was using him as a bridge to a lifestyle she hadn't earned. I thought about my mother often during these past 2 years. Lorraine, now 82, living in an assisted care facility because her body finally gave out after decades of physical labor. She'd sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had. And here I was, letting her legacy be picked apart by a woman who'd never worked a hard day in her life. That Italian leather bag Melody stole wasn't just a purse. It was the last thing my mother gave me while she was still herself, still living independently, still the fierce woman who raised me on nothing but determination and love. When she handed it to me the day she moved into assisted living, her hands were shaking and her eyes were full of tears. "This was my one nice thing," she told me. "I saved for 2 years to buy it, back when you were in college. I wanted something beautiful that was just mine. Now I want you to have it. To remember where you came from and to never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are." I'd carried that bag almost every day since. It wasn't about the monetary value, though the Italian leather and craftsmanship made it worth a few $1,000s. It was about what it represented. My mother's sacrifice, my own journey from Southie to the boardroom, the legacy of strong women who bend but don't break. Melody knew none of this. To her, it was just another expensive item to exploit, another thing the rich mother-in-law had plenty of and wouldn't miss. She was wrong. This time, she was finally, catastrophically wrong. The days between Melody's humiliation at Burlington Mall and the Sunday dinner I'd demanded were among the longest of my life. Not because I was anxious or uncertain about what I'd done, quite the opposite. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when you finally stop fighting against yourself. Garrett called me 4 more times that first evening. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from confused to pleading to frustrated, each one a variation of the same theme. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. Melody is devastated. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. As if I'd somehow misunderstood watching his wife steal my wallet with my own eyes. As if the items I'd found hidden in my guest room closet had magically teleported there through some innocent accident. My son, the attorney, trained to evaluate evidence and build logical arguments, was willfully blind when it came to the woman he'd married. I didn't blame him entirely. Love makes fools of us all. I'd certainly made my share of compromises for Thomas over the years, overlooked things I shouldn't have, accepted behavior that didn't meet my standards because the alternative felt too frightening. But there's a difference between the small accommodations that every marriage requires and the wholesale denial of reality that Garrett was practicing. The next morning, I drove to Brookside Manor to visit my mother. I needed her wisdom, her perspective, her particular brand of tough love that had guided me through every difficult moment of my life. Lorraine was sitting in her favorite chair by the window when I arrived, working on a crossword puzzle with the fierce concentration she brought to everything. At 82, her body had betrayed her in countless ways. Arthritis had gnarled her once strong hands. Her knees couldn't support her weight anymore. She needed help bathing, dressing, managing her medications. But her mind remained sharp as ever, and her eyes lit up when she saw me walk through the door. "Corinne, you look tired, sweetheart. Sit down and tell me what's wrong." I sat in the chair across from her and told her everything. The wallet, the phone call I'd overheard, the declined transaction at Burberry, the things I'd found in the guest room closet, Garrett's defensive reaction. All of it came pouring out in a rush of words I'd been holding back for too long. When I finished, Mom was quiet for a long moment. She set down her crossword puzzle and looked at me with those eyes that had seen so much hardship, so much struggle, so much triumph against impossible odds. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "You should have done it sooner, but you did the right thing. I'm scared of losing Garrett. If I push too hard, if I force him to choose between me and Melody, I might lose my son forever." "You might," Mom agreed, and the bluntness of it hit me like a physical blow. "That's a real possibility, and you need to make peace with it. But let me ask you something, Corinne. The son who would cut off his mother for holding his thieving wife accountable, is that really a son worth keeping?" "Mom, that's harsh. Life is harsh. I cleaned toilets for rich women who treated me like furniture so you could go to college. Your father walked out and left us with nothing. I buried 2 sisters before I turned 50. Harsh is all I know." She reached over and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite the arthritis. "But here's what I also know. You raised that boy with love and sacrifice. You gave him every opportunity. If he chooses a woman who steals from his own mother over the woman who gave him life, that's his failing, not yours. I keep thinking about what I did wrong, where I went wrong as a mother that he turned out this way. Stop that. You didn't do anything wrong. Garrett is a grown man who makes his own choices, and right now he's making bad ones because it's easier than facing the truth. That's not your fault. That's his weakness, and the only person who can fix it is him." She squeezed my hand and then released it, reaching for something on her side table. A white envelope, slightly yellowed with age, my name written on the front in her careful handwriting. "I was going to give you this on your 60th birthday," she said, "but I think you need it now." "What is it?" "Something I wrote 3 years ago, right after Thomas passed. when I could see you disappearing into your grief, and I was worried I wouldn't be around long enough to say what needed to be said. She pressed the envelope into my hands. Read it when you're alone. And remember who you are, Corinne. Remember where you come from. I tucked the envelope into my purse, the new one I'd started carrying since Melody took the Italian leather bag. I wasn't ready to read it yet. I needed to be stronger first, more certain of my path. There's something else, I said. Something I haven't told anyone. Mom waited, patient as always. 6 months ago, I met with an estate attorney. I had documents drawn up, a new will and trust structure that protects my assets in the event of Garrett's divorce. Everything would go into a trust for my grandchildren, with Sloan as the executor. Garrett and Melody wouldn't be able to touch it. I expected shock, maybe disappointment. Instead, Mom smiled, a small, satisfied expression that reminded me of the way she looked when I'd brought home straight A's as a child. Smart girl. I raised a smart girl. I felt terrible doing it, like I was betraying my own son. You were protecting him, from himself and from her. There's no betrayal in that. Mom picked up her crossword puzzle again, a signal that she'd said what needed to be said. Now go home and get ready for Sunday. You've got a battle coming, and you need to be rested. I kissed her forehead and left, the envelope burning a hole in my purse the whole drive home. That evening, Sloan called from Seattle. News had traveled fast, apparently. Garrett had called his sister looking for an ally and had found the opposite. Mom, I heard what happened. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. I can't believe she actually stole from you. I mean, I can believe it. I always knew she was capable of it, but still. The audacity. It wasn't the first time. I found things she'd taken over the years. Your grandmother's earrings, the scarf I thought I'd lost, your father's anniversary bracelet. Sloan was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I moved so far away. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from her. This isn't your fault, and you did try to warn me. I just wasn't ready to listen. I'm flying out for Sunday dinner. Don't try to talk me out of it. Marcus agrees he'll hold down the fort here. I need to be there when you confront her. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was 6 months pregnant and didn't need the stress of a family confrontation. But the truth was, I needed her there. I needed at least one person in that room who saw the situation clearly, who wouldn't try to minimize or excuse or smooth things over. Thank you, sweetheart. It means more than you know. Garrett is going to try to make you feel guilty, Sloan warned. He's going to play the victim, say you're tearing the family apart. Don't let him. This is on Melody, and it's on him for enabling her. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, Mom. See you Sunday. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. I went through my normal routines, gym and groceries and coffee with friends, but my mind was elsewhere, preparing arguments and counter-arguments, anticipating every possible direction the conversation might take. On Friday afternoon, I finally opened my mother's letter. I was sitting in my bedroom, the late autumn light filtering through the curtains, and my hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the pages. Mom's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, evidence of the arthritis that had been worsening even then. But every word was perfectly legible. My dearest Corinne, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I've decided you need these words more than I need to save them for your birthday. Or maybe it means I'm gone and someone found this envelope among my things. Either way, I want you to know some truths I should have told you long ago. You are the greatest accomplishment of my life, not because of your career or your money or your beautiful house, because of who you are, the strength you carry, the way you never let anyone tell you what you couldn't do. You are everything I dreamed you'd be when I held you as a baby and wondered what kind of world I was bringing you into. But there's something I worry about, sweetheart, something I've watched grow worse over the years. You give too much of yourself to people who don't deserve it. You keep the peace at the cost of your own dignity. You inherited my work ethic, but also my tendency to put everyone else's needs before my own. I did that because I had to. Because I was a single mother with no education and no options, and survival meant making myself small so others could feel big. But you don't have to live that way. You've earned the right to take up space, to demand respect, to cut people out of your life who refuse to treat you with basic decency. I know you hate conflict. I know you'd rather suffer in silence than make a scene. But some battles are worth fighting, Corinne. Some relationships need to be burned to the ground so something healthier can grow in their place. If someone is hurting you, treating you like you're less than, taking advantage of your generous heart, I want you to remember this. You came from a woman who scrubbed floors for 30 years so her daughter could stand tall. Don't dishonor that sacrifice by letting anyone, not a husband, not a child, not anyone, treat you like a doormat. You are Corinne Caldwell Brennan. You are my daughter, and you are stronger than you know. All my love, now and forever, Mom. I read the letter 3 times. By the end, tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing myself the way my mother had always seen me. She was right, about everything. I'd spent so much energy trying to keep the peace with Melody, trying not to rock the boat with Garrett, that I'd lost sight of my own worth. I'd let myself be diminished, dismissed, robbed in my own home, all because I was afraid of being seen as difficult. No more. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that usually makes me want to take long walks and appreciate the beauty of New England. Instead, I spent the morning preparing. Not the meal, which I'd had catered to eliminate distractions, but myself. I chose my outfit carefully. A navy silk blouse, gray wool trousers, the pearl necklace Thomas gave me for our 20th anniversary. Professional, but not cold. Put together, but not trying too hard. Sloane arrived at 4, 2 hours before the scheduled dinner. She looked beautiful despite her pregnancy fatigue, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face set with the same determination I saw in the mirror every morning. "How are you feeling?" I asked as I hugged her carefully, mindful of her growing belly. Nervous, angry, ready. She pulled back and looked at me with those eyes so like her father's. "You?" "The same. All of the above." We sat in the living room and went over the plan. I'd prepared a folder with all the evidence, photos of the items I'd found in the guest room closet, bank statements showing the declined transactions, a timeline of things that had gone missing over the past 2 years. Sloane had done some digging of her own and discovered that Melody had been fired from her last 3 jobs for stealing from coworkers, information that had somehow never made it to Garrett. "He's going to be blindsided," Sloane said. "He genuinely doesn't know about her history. Do you think it will make a difference?" "I don't know. He's so deep in denial at this point, but at least he won't be able to say he wasn't told." At 6 o'clock precisely, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I watched through the window as Garrett helped Melody out of the passenger seat. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my first month's rent out of college. Her face was arranged in an expression of wounded innocence, the look of a woman who'd been grievously wronged and was graciously allowing the opportunity for reconciliation. I felt my jaw tighten. This was going to be harder than I thought. Garrett knocked rather than using his key, a small formality that told me he wasn't sure of his welcome anymore. I let Sloane answer while I positioned myself in the living room, standing rather than sitting, a power move I'd learned in my years of corporate negotiations. They entered together, Garrett's hand on Melody's back in a protective gesture that made my heart ache. My son, still trying to shield a woman who didn't deserve his loyalty. "Mom," he said, his voice cautious, "thanks for having us. Sit down, both of you. We have a lot to discuss." Melody glanced at the folder on the coffee table, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation, trying to figure out what I knew and how she could spin it. "Before we begin," she said, her voice honeyed with false sweetness, "I just want to say how sorry I am for the misunderstanding last week. I should have asked before borrowing your wallet, and I completely understand why you were upset. It was thoughtless of me, and I promise it will never happen again." I let the silence stretch for a long moment. In negotiations, I'd learned that whoever speaks first after an opening offer usually loses. Melody had made her play. Minimize, apologize, move on. I wasn't going to make it that easy. "Sit down, Melody." Something in my tone made her comply without further protest. She perched on the edge of the sofa, Garrett beside her, their bodies angled toward each other and away from me. Sloane stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching. This isn't about last week, I said. Or rather, last week was simply the final straw in a pattern that's been going on for 2 years, a pattern I've been too weak to confront until now. I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence piece by piece, the photos of the items from the guest room closet, the documentation of missing possessions that coincided with Melody's visits, the bank statements, the timeline. With each item, I watched Garrett's face change. Confusion gave way to discomfort, then to something that looked like dawning horror. Melody, for her part, maintained her composure remarkably well. Only the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her anxiety. "This is ridiculous," she said when I'd finished. "You're trying to frame me. Anyone could have planted those things in the closet." "Who, Melody? Who else has access to that room? Who else would have reason to hide my possessions there?" "I don't know. Maybe you put them there yourself and forgot about it. You're not exactly young anymore. Memory issues happen." I felt Sloane stiffen beside me, but I held up a hand to stop her from intervening. This was exactly the response I'd expected, and I was prepared for it. "That's interesting you should mention that," I said calmly, "because I've spent 2 years questioning my own memory. Every time something went missing, I assumed I'd misplaced it. I assumed I was getting forgetful, getting old, losing my grip on things. You let me believe that. You watched me search for items you knew exactly where to find, and you said nothing." "Mom?" Garrett started, but I cut him off. "I'm not finished." I turned back to Melody. "I could perhaps forgive the theft. Things can be replaced. What I cannot forgive is the gaslighting, the systematic attempt to make me doubt my own mind. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To wonder if you're losing your grip on reality?" For the first time, something cracked in Melody's facade. Not remorse, not exactly. More like the realization that her usual tactics weren't going to work this time. "Corinne, I never meant to make you feel that way. I needed things sometimes, and I knew you had so much, and I kept telling myself I'd put them back before you noticed. That's not an apology. That's an excuse. What do you want from me?" Her voice rose, taking on a shrill edge. "I said I was sorry. I said it wouldn't happen again. What more do you want?" I looked at my son, sitting silent beside his wife, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment when I had to lay down the ultimatum that might cost me my relationship with him forever. "I want accountability," I said. "Real accountability, not empty words. I want you to get treatment for whatever compulsion drives you to take things that don't belong to you. I want complete financial transparency with Garrett. No more hidden debts, no more secret spending. And I want you to get a real job and start contributing to your household instead of living off my son, and by extension, off me. And if I don't, then I press charges for theft. I cut off all financial support immediately, and I change my will to ensure that not a single penny of my estate ever touches your hands." I paused to let that sink in. "I have documentation of everything, Melody. Dates, items, values. My attorney has already reviewed it. If this goes to court, you will lose." The room went silent. Melody's face had gone pale, her carefully constructed mask finally slipping to reveal the desperate, frightened woman underneath. Garrett looked like he'd been punched in the stomach, and somewhere deep inside me, beneath the anger and the hurt and the determination, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Not for what Melody had done, but for whatever brokenness had led her to become this person. She was only 28. Somewhere along the way, someone had failed her badly enough that she'd grown up believing theft and manipulation were acceptable ways to get what she wanted. But pity didn't mean I was going to let her continue hurting me and my family. "You have 1 week to decide," I said. 1 week to choose what kind of person you want to be. And Garrett, you have the same choice to make. I love you more than you'll ever know, but I will not be disrespected in my own home anymore. Not by anyone. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Garrett didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out in any way. The silence was deafening, a void where my son used to be, and I found myself checking my phone constantly like a teenager waiting to hear from a crush. Sloane flew back to Seattle the morning after the confrontation, but she called every day to check on me. "Give him time," she kept saying. "He's processing. This is a lot for him to absorb. What if he chooses her? Then he chooses her, and you learn to live with that. But I don't think he will, Mom. I saw his face when you laid out that evidence. He knows the truth now. He just needs time to accept it. I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe that the son I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and tell me I was the best mom in the whole world, was still in there somewhere beneath the defensive husband who'd been making excuses for his wife's behavior. On Wednesday, 4 days after the dinner, I went to visit my mother again. I needed her steadiness, her clarity, her ability to cut through my spiraling thoughts and get to the heart of things. She was having a bad day when I arrived. The nursing staff warned me before I went in. Sometimes her mind wandered now, slipping between past and present, confusing me with her sister who died 20 years ago. It was happening more frequently lately, these episodes, and each one felt like losing her a little bit more. But when I walked into her room, her eyes focused on me with perfect recognition. "Corinne, you look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't. Not well, anyway." "Sit down. Tell me." I told her about the confrontation, about the ultimatum, about Garrett's silence. She listened without interrupting, her gnarled hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving my face. "You did everything right," she said when I finished. "Now you have to let go." "Let go? How can I let go? He's my son." "Exactly. He's your son, not your puppet. You've said your piece. You've laid out the consequences. Now it's his turn to decide what kind of man he wants to be." She reached over and patted my hand. "You can't control what he chooses. You can only control how you respond to it." "I'm terrified, Mom. I'm terrified that I'm going to lose him." "I know, sweetheart. But here's the thing about fear. It's usually worse than reality. Whatever happens, you'll survive it. You'll adapt. You'll find a way forward. That's what we do. That's what Caldwell women have always done." I stayed with her for another hour, talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying her presence while I still could. When I left, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace, exactly, but acceptance. Whatever was coming, I would face it. I would survive it. And I would not regret standing up for myself, no matter the cost. Thursday evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sloan was in Seattle. My friends knew I wasn't up for socializing, and Garrett had shown no indication that he planned to contact me before the deadline. I opened the door to find my son standing on my porch, alone. No Melody. Just Garrett, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the span of a week. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usually immaculate suit rumpled, his whole body sagging with exhaustion. "Can I come in?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I stepped aside without a word. He walked past me into the living room, the same room where I'd confronted him and Melody 4 days earlier, and stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. "I found more," he finally said. "After Sunday, I went through everything. The closets, the storage unit, her car. I found more." I waited, letting him tell it at his own pace. Credit card statements she'd hidden. $23,000 in debt I didn't know about. Receipts for things she told me were gifts from friends. And the pawn ticket for Dad's watch. I closed my eyes. Thomas's watch. The vintage Omega he'd inherited from his father. The one he'd worn every day of our marriage. The one I'd given to Garrett after the funeral because I knew how much it meant to him. She pawned it 6 months ago. Got $800 for something worth at least $5,000. His voice cracked. She told me she put it in the safe deposit box for safekeeping. She looked me right in the eyes and lied, and I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Oh, Garrett. I confronted her last night, asked her about the watch, about the debts, about everything. She tried to deny it at first, then she tried to blame you, said you'd turn me against her. When that didn't work, she cried and begged me to forgive her, promised she'd change, swore it would never happen again. He laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. The same promises she made after the first time I caught her in a lie, and the second time, and every time after that. He finally turned to face me, and I saw the full extent of his devastation. My son, my capable, confident, successful son, looked utterly broken. "I filed for divorce this morning." The words hit me like a physical force. I'd hoped for this outcome, prayed for it even, but hearing it spoken aloud was still a shock. "Are you sure? That's a big decision to make in the heat of emotion." "I've been making it for 2 years, Mom. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." He crossed the room and sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I knew. Some part of me always knew something was wrong, but I loved her, or I thought I did, and I kept telling myself that if I just tried harder, if I was just a better husband, she would change. I sat down beside him and put my hand on his back, the same gesture I'd used when he was a little boy, crying over a skinned knee or a broken toy. That's not how it works, sweetheart. You can't love someone into being a different person. They have to want to change for themselves. Why didn't I listen to you? To Sloan? You both tried to warn me. Because love makes us blind. Because hope is stronger than evidence. Because you're a good person who wanted to see the good in someone else. I rubbed his back gently. There's no shame in that, Garrett. The shame would be in continuing to ignore the truth now that you can't unsee it. He looked up at me, his eyes wet with tears he was trying not to shed. I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For not believing you, for defending her, for letting her treat you that way. I'm so incredibly sorry. I know you are, and I forgive you. We sat there together as the evening light faded, mother and son, beginning the long process of rebuilding what had been broken. The divorce proceedings began the following week, and Melody did not go quietly. I suppose I should have expected that. A woman who'd spent 2 years stealing from her mother-in-law and lying to her husband wasn't going to simply accept defeat and walk away. She had too much to lose, too much of her carefully constructed lifestyle at stake, and she was willing to fight dirty to keep it. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after Garrett filed the papers. I was having breakfast when my phone rang, an unknown number with a Boston area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Brennan? This is Patricia Whitfield from the Boston Globe. I'm working on a story about elder financial abuse, and I was hoping you could comment on allegations that your son has been systematically stealing from you for the past several years. I felt my blood run cold. I'm sorry. What? We've received documents suggesting that Garrett Brennan, an attorney at Morrison and Associates, has been using his position as your financial advisor to siphon funds from your retirement accounts. Would you like to respond to these allegations? Those allegations are completely false. My son has never had access to my financial accounts. I don't know who gave you this information, but they're lying. So you deny that there's been any financial impropriety within your family? I deny that my son has stolen anything from me. If you print otherwise, you'll be hearing from my attorney. I hung up and immediately called Garrett. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. She went to the press, Mom. Melody went to the goddamn press. I just got a call from a reporter at the Globe. She's claiming you've been stealing from me. I know. I got a call too. And so did my firm's managing partner. I heard him take a shaky breath. They're putting me on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Even though the allegations are completely baseless, they can't have an attorney on staff who's been publicly accused of financial crimes. My hands were trembling. This wasn't just about hurting me anymore. Melody was trying to destroy Garrett's entire career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for. And she was using me as the weapon. We need to get ahead of this, I said. I'll call my attorney. We'll issue a statement making clear that these allegations are fabricated and that you've never had any control over my finances. It won't matter. The damage is already done. Even if we prove she's lying, there will always be people who believe where there's smoke, there's fire. His voice broke slightly. I did this, Mom. I married her. I brought her into our family. This is all my fault. No, this is Melody's fault. She made these choices, not you. And we're going to fight back. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations, media management, and emotional exhaustion. My attorney, a formidable woman named Sandra Chen, who I'd worked with during my corporate days, took charge of the situation with the kind of ruthless efficiency I remembered from hostile takeover negotiations. She obtained copies of all the documents Melody had provided to the reporter and systematically dismantled every claim. Bank records proving Garrett had never been a signatory on any of my accounts. Financial statements showing my net worth had actually increased over the past 5 years. Testimony from my actual financial advisor confirming that all transactions had been authorized by me alone. But Sandra also uncovered something else, something that changed everything. Corinne, I need to show you something, she said during one of our strategy sessions. My investigator has been looking into Melody's background, and we found a pattern. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were court records, police reports, and newspaper clippings from 3 different states. Melody Sinclair has done this before. Twice, actually. Her first marriage, at 21, to a man named Robert Hensley in Delaware. She accused him of domestic abuse during the divorce proceedings. He lost his job, his friends, his reputation. 6 months later, all charges were dropped for lack of evidence, but by then, the damage was done. I felt sick as I continued reading. Her second target wasn't a husband. It was an employer, a jewelry store owner in Connecticut named Margaret Vance. Melody worked there for 8 months before being fired for theft. She responded by accusing Mrs. Vance of running an insurance fraud scheme. The investigation cleared Mrs. Vance completely, but she had to close her business due to the legal costs and lost customers. She's done this before, I said slowly. This is what she does. When she can't get what she wants, she destroys people. Exactly. And now we can prove it. Sandra smiled grimly. I've already reached out to Robert Hensley and Margaret Vance. They're both willing to testify about their experiences with Melody. We're building a case for defamation, and frankly, we might have enough for criminal charges of filing false reports. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like hope. But Melody wasn't finished yet. 2 days later, she showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the garden, trying to find some peace among my late autumn roses, when I heard footsteps on the stone path. I turned to find her standing there, looking nothing like the polished woman I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face bare of makeup, her eyes red and swollen. She looked desperate, unhinged, nothing like the calculating predator I'd come to recognize. Corinne, please, I need to talk to you. I stood slowly, keeping my gardening shears in my hand. Not as a weapon exactly, but as a reminder to us both that I wasn't defenseless. You need to leave, Melody. My attorney has advised me not to speak with you. I know, but please just listen. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I nodded. Talk, but stay where you are. She took a shaky breath. I know you hate me. I know I've done terrible things, but you have to understand, I never meant for any of this to happen. I wanted to feel safe. I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere, like I had something that couldn't be taken away from me. So you stole from me. You lied to your husband. And when it all fell apart, you tried to destroy both of us. I was scared. Tears were streaming down her face now, and I couldn't tell if they were genuine or another manipulation. When Garrett filed for divorce, I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. I've never had anything that was really mine. My whole life, I've been scrambling, trying to hold on to things, trying to build some kind of security, and it all kept slipping away. That's not an excuse, Melody. Lots of people grow up with nothing. I grew up with nothing. My mother cleaned houses so I could go to college. The difference is, we built our lives through hard work, not by taking from others. I know that now. She took a step toward me, and I raised my hand to stop her. Corinne, please, I'm begging you. Drop the defamation case. Call off your lawyers. I'll sign whatever divorce papers Garrett wants. I won't ask for anything. I'll disappear completely. Just please don't destroy my life. I looked at this woman, this stranger who had infiltrated my family and caused so much damage, and I searched for any trace of genuine remorse. What I saw instead was fear. Pure, animal fear of consequences finally catching up with her. You destroyed your own life, Melody. Every choice you made led you here. The stealing, the lying, the false accusations, that was all you. I can change. I swear I can change. If you just give me another chance. I gave you chances, more than you deserved, and you responded by going to the press with fabricated stories about my son. I felt my voice hardening, the corporate executive emerging after weeks of being just a wounded mother. You tried to ruin his career. You tried to make me look like a victim of my own child. You don't get any more chances. Then what do you want? What will it take to make this stop? I considered the question carefully. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Simply to never see this woman again? I want accountability, I said finally. Real accountability. I want you to sign a statement admitting that your allegations against Garrett were false. I want you to publicly retract everything you told that reporter. And I want you to get help, real professional help, for whatever is broken inside you that makes you think this behavior is acceptable. And if I do all that, then I'll recommend that my attorney pursue a settlement rather than a trial. You'll still face consequences, but they won't be as severe as they could be. Melody stared at me for a long moment, calculations visible behind her tear-filled eyes. I could see her weighing her options, trying to figure out if there was some angle she hadn't considered, some way to come out ahead. I need time to think about it. You have 48 hours. After that, my offer expires, and we proceed to trial. She turned and walked away without another word. I watched her go, this woman who had caused so much pain, and I felt something unexpected wash over me. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Something closer to exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that comes after a long battle. I went inside and called Sandra to update her on the conversation. Then I called Garrett, who had been staying in my guest room since the divorce filing, unable to face the apartment he'd shared with Melody. She came to see me, I told him. She's scared. I think she might actually take the deal. Do you think she means it? About changing? I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know. But at this point, it doesn't really matter. What matters is protecting you and ending this nightmare. I keep thinking about where it all went wrong, he said quietly. Was there a moment when I could have seen who she really was? Something I missed? Probably. But hindsight is always clearer than the present. You loved her, or you loved who you thought she was. There's no shame in that. I'm 32 years old, and I'm getting divorced and living with my mother. This is not how I pictured my life going. Life rarely goes the way we picture it. The question is whether we let the detours define us or whether we find a new path forward. He was quiet for a long moment. When did you get so wise? I learned it from my mother. Who learned it from hers? It's a Caldwell woman tradition. The next 48 hours crawled by. I tried to maintain my normal routines, but my mind kept circling back to Melody, to the confrontation in the garden, to the choice she was facing. Part of me hoped she would take the deal, if only to end this chapter and begin healing. Another part, a darker part I wasn't proud of, wanted her to refuse so I could watch her face the full consequences of her actions in court. On the morning of the deadline, Sandra called. She signed everything we asked for. Full retraction, admission that the allegations were fabricated, agreement to seek psychiatric treatment as a condition of the settlement. I sat down heavily on my kitchen chair. It's over? The defamation case is settled. The divorce will take a few more months to finalize, but Garrett's attorney says Melody isn't contesting anything. She's agreed to walk away with nothing. What about his firm? They've already seen the retraction. My understanding is they'll be reinstating him next week with a formal apology. Sandra paused. Corinne, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't think I've ever seen someone so thoroughly outmaneuvered. You should be proud of yourself. But I didn't feel proud. I felt empty, drained, like I'd been running a marathon and had finally crossed the finish line, only to discover there was no celebration waiting. Just silence and the long road of recovery ahead. That evening, I gathered my family for dinner. Garrett was there, looking slightly less haunted than he had in weeks. Sloane had flown in that morning, her pregnant belly now prominently visible, her husband Marcus by her side, and my mother, who I'd arranged to have transported from Brookside Manor for the occasion, sat at the head of the table in a wheelchair, her eyes bright with the recognition of everyone around her. To family, I said, raising my glass. To the people who stand by us when everything falls apart. To family, they echoed. I looked around the table at the faces of the people I loved most in the world. My son, wounded but healing. My daughter, fierce and loyal. My mother, the foundation on which everything else was built. My unborn granddaughter, the future that made all of this fighting worthwhile. Melody had tried to tear us apart. Instead, she'd made us stronger. That was her final failure and our greatest victory. 6 months later, I stood in the maternity ward of Swedish Medical Center in Seattle, holding my granddaughter for the first time. She was so small, barely 7 pounds, with a tuft of dark hair and her mother's determined chin. When she wrapped her tiny fingers around my thumb, I felt something shift inside me, a door closing on the past and another one opening onto something new. We're naming her Lorraine, Sloane said from her hospital bed, exhausted, but radiant. After Grandma. We want her to grow up knowing where she comes from. I couldn't speak. The tears came too fast, blurring my vision until my granddaughter became a soft, warm weight against my chest rather than a face I could see clearly. Lorraine, my mother's name, carried forward into another generation. Mom would be so honored, I finally managed. I can't wait to tell her. The past 6 months had been a long road of healing and rebuilding. The divorce was finalized in March, a quiet proceeding that ended with Melody walking away with nothing but her personal belongings and the clothes on her back. I heard through Sandra that she'd moved back to Delaware to live with her mother, that she'd enrolled in an intensive outpatient program for compulsive behavior, that she was working part-time at a department store while she tried to piece her life back together. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I didn't feel triumphant either. Mostly, I just felt relieved that she was gone, that her shadow no longer fell across my family. Garrett had thrown himself into rebuilding. His firm reinstated him with full back pay and a formal letter of apology that he framed and hung in his office as a reminder of what he'd survived. He sold the apartment in Back Bay, the one I'd been paying for, and moved into a modest one-bedroom in Cambridge that he could actually afford on his own salary. "I need to do this myself," he told me when I offered to help with the deposit. "I need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet." I understood. More than that, I was proud of him for recognizing what he needed. The boy who had avoided conflict at all costs was becoming a man who faced his problems head-on. It was painful to watch sometimes, like watching a butterfly struggle out of its cocoon, but I knew better than to interfere. Some transformations have to happen on their own schedule. He started therapy in February, something I'd gently suggested and he'd initially resisted. But after a few sessions, he admitted it was helping him understand patterns he'd never recognized before, the ways he'd learned to keep the peace at his own expense, the tendency to prioritize other people's comfort over his own well-being. "I think I learned it from watching you and Dad," he told me one evening over dinner at my house. "You were always the one who smoothed things over, who made sure everyone else was happy. I thought that's what love looked like." "It was what love looked like in our house," I admitted. "But it wasn't healthy. I should have shown you a different model. You're showing me now. That's what matters." My mother met baby Lorraine 3 weeks after she was born, when Sloane felt strong enough to make the trip to Boston. It was one of Mom's good days, thank God. Her eyes were clear, her mind sharp, and when I placed her great-granddaughter in her arms, she looked down at that tiny face with an expression of pure wonder. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your great-grandma. I'm going to tell you so many stories about the women you come from. Strong women, fighters. You have a legacy to live up to, Miss Lorraine." The baby made a small sound, almost like acknowledgement, and we all laughed through our tears. I took a photo of that moment, 4 generations of Caldwell women together. My mother, weathered but unbroken. Me, finally at peace with who I was. Sloane, fierce and loving. And baby Lorraine, a blank page waiting to be written. I had the photo framed and hung it in my living room, right next to the picture of Thomas that I'd kept on the mantel since his death. He would have loved being a grandfather. He would have spoiled that little girl rotten. The grief of his absence still hit me sometimes, unexpected waves that knocked the breath out of me. But it was softer now, woven into the fabric of my life rather than threatening to tear it apart. The Italian leather bag sat in my closet, restored to its rightful place. I'd gotten it back from Melody's possessions during the divorce proceedings, along with my grandmother's earrings, my mother's scarf, and all the other items she'd stolen over the years. I didn't carry the bag anymore. It felt too heavy now, weighted with memories both precious and painful. But I kept it safe, a reminder of where I came from and what I'd overcome. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, I visited his grave with Garrett and Sloane. We brought flowers, white roses that had been his favorite, and we stood together in the spring sunshine and talked about the man he'd been. "I think he'd be proud of us," Sloane said, "for how we handled everything." "He'd be proud of Mom," Garrett added, "for standing up for herself. He always said she was the strongest person he knew, but I don't think even he realized how strong." I thought about Thomas, about our 33 years together, about all the compromises and accommodations and small surrenders that had made up our marriage. I'd loved him. I still loved him, but I was also grateful in a strange way that his death had forced me to become someone new, someone who didn't need a partner to feel complete, someone who could stand alone and not be diminished by it. He would have hated the drama, I said, and we all laughed because it was true. Thomas had avoided conflict even more than Garrett did. The whole situation with Melody would have sent him hiding in his workshop for weeks. But he would have supported you, Garrett said. In the end, he always supported you. Yes, he did. We laid the flowers on his grave and stood in silence for a moment, each lost in our own memories. Then Sloane looped her arm through mine, and Garrett took my other hand, and we walked back to the car together. Life, I was learning, wasn't about the endings. It wasn't about defeating the villains or winning the battles or proving that you were right all along. It was about the moments in between, the quiet dinners with your son where you both admitted your mistakes and promised to do better, the phone calls with your daughter where you laughed about nothing and everything, the afternoons spent holding your granddaughter while she slept, feeling her heartbeat against your chest, knowing that some part of you would live on in her long after you were gone. I turned 60 that summer. Garrett threw me a party at my house, inviting friends I hadn't seen in years, colleagues from my corporate days, neighbors who had watched my children grow up. My mother was there, wheeled in by a nurse from Brookside Manor, her eyes occasionally wandering, but her smile genuine whenever they landed on my face. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said when I knelt beside her wheelchair. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become. I learned from the best, Mom." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Remember what I wrote in that letter. You come from strong women, and now you are the strong woman that others will learn from." I looked across my backyard at the people gathered there. Garrett, laughing at something his sister said. Sloane, bouncing baby Lorraine on her hip while Marcus took photos. Friends and family and neighbors, all the people who made up the tapestry of my life. A year ago, I'd been standing in my kitchen watching my daughter-in-law steal my wallet, feeling powerless and disrespected and unsure of my own worth. Now I was surrounded by love, respected by my children, at peace with myself in a way I hadn't been in decades. Melody had tried to take so much from me. In the end, she'd given me something instead, the push I needed to finally become the woman I was always meant to be. I raised my glass to the setting sun, to the future spread out before me, to all the years still left to live. "To new beginnings," I said softly. And somewhere in the distance, I could have sworn I heard my mother's voice echoing back, "To new beginnings, my darling girl, to new beginnings."